It is time for Talking Pints. We've rolled out the barrel. I'm joined by Robert Hardman, royal author, documentary maker, Mail columnist, and we're here with what we can now call with Brexit genuinely an imperial pint, which I think is a rather good thing. And it's Robert's suggestion, not mine, I have to say. But we're going to begin by giving it a little toast, aren't we?
Absolutely.
Her Majesty the Queen.
The Queen.
The Queen. Well, I kind of feel with that.
We probably should have stood up for that, Nigel.
We probably should, but it wouldn't have worked with the camera angles. So I do think it would have been very good.
I think we'll be forgiven.
Robert, I said before the break, just my personal thoughts on this, just what an extraordinary occasion is. We're not going to see the like of it again. I'm pretty angry at some of the pettifogging that we've seen from local councils, you know, cherry pickers taking down banners. But that aside, you know, one of the pollsters said they thought 15 million people would be attending, you know, organised events this Sunday, let alone the number of families that will get together and watch the pageant on television or whatever. When you compare this to previous Jubilees, how does it feel?
It does feel different because we've never been here before. We've never had, this country's never had a platinum. And where the colour chart goes from here, I don't know. But there is that sense of this being unique. All previous Jubilees have sort of started with predictions of sort of doom and gloom and no one's terribly interested, and then suddenly it's huge. This one, it's been very interesting. It's just been building, you know. I mean, the numbers of people wanting to hold parties, and as you say, some councils have sort of been ridiculous about, you know, you can't put up bunting or, you know, you can't put a trestle table out with a cake on it unless it's got a licence. Anyway, I mean,
risk assessment.
I think actually there will be a sort of outbreak of common sense and people will just be allowed to get on with it. And I mean, I've been down the Mall yesterday and today. I mean, it really is, it's building up. And I think it's that sense of, you know, for all our lives, we've rather taken our monarch for granted because she's just so dependable.
And always been there.
Yeah, she's always been there. You know she'll turn up. She's always been on, for anyone born after the Second World War, we can't remember a time when there was another face on the coins or the banknotes or you know, or just in public life. She's just been this utter sense of permanence. And now I think we're suddenly realising that she is precious, you know, that there are moments we haven't seen her lately.
And frail, perhaps, as
but
well.
still doing her best. I mean, I do think there's this constant focus on what she can't do. I think we should be focusing on, isn't it amazing, all the things she's still doing well into her 10th decade? And I think for all these reasons, a Jubilee is a moment where you kind of just stand back and reflect. You look at the sort of broad canvas and you just see, here is someone who came to the throne when we were on rations. I mean, most of what you see behind you is a bomb site. You know, the age of steam, Everest hadn't even been climbed, and she's reigned right the way through the Cold War, the Korean War, the jet age, the space age, into the digital age. She's seen it all, and she's just been rock solid, dependable all the way through. And I think this is a moment to sort of, you know, just nod and say thank you.
I first met you 30 years ago, 29 years ago. It was the first ever UKIP conference. He was the only journalist that turned up. We actually gave him a round of applause.
I remember that.
We wouldn't have done after we'd read the article. But so I first met you all that time ago. I've met you out and about, you know, Normandy. You've been covering that, and you've kind of, as a journalist, you've covered everything: current affairs, politics, sport, history. I mean, a real sort of polymathic journalistic exec. You obviously love being a journalist, but what is it about you as a journalist that has made you focus so much on the Queen and the royal family? Because you've done books, and we'll talk about your latest one in a minute, TV documentaries. You've put a lot of your life into this. Why?
Well, I never set out to be a royal correspondent. I don't think anybody does. I sort of fell into it by accident. And it was just at the start of what we now know as the Annus Horribilis, when everything was going wrong in the royal family. And yet, what struck me, and I just happened to be sort of doing a few royal stories because no one else was on my old paper, The Telegraph, at the start of that year, and it was right, well, you seem to know the royal family, you better do the next story, and so it just snowballed. But what I found extraordinary during that period was that you had the domestic soap opera here of all the dramas about broken marriages and the terrible winds of fire and money and all that. And yet at the same time, on the world stage, the Queen was seen as this extraordinary force. It was just after the fall of the Berlin Wall, Eastern Europe opening up, Soviet Union falling apart. And to go with the Queen to someone like to be the first, watch her being the first monarch to pay a state visit to Russia and seeing the reaction there, or seeing her going through Eastern Europe to places like Hungary and the Czech Republic, and what she meant to them, and the way that they would thank her, not just for coming, but for having not come during the bad years, and all that she represented. And then, it was the end of apartheid, and this extraordinary friendship with Nelson Mandela, who really was...
that was genuine and real.
Oh, absolutely. Well, his first executive act after his election in '94 was to rejoin South Africa to the Commonwealth, and that meant so much
really
to her.
big thing.
And they were such friends. I mean, and he was the only world leader who could call her Elizabeth and get away with it, and he did, and so to see all that going on at the same time, I just thought, actually this institution and this monarch, that there's a bigger story here. And
is it the institution itself? And you've written about George III too, I know. But the institution itself, over the centuries, has had periods of great popularity, but periods of prolonged, deep unpopularity. I mean, cartoon, parodied, the Prince Regent, and all of this stuff. Is our current relatively high level of reverence for the institution here in this country and around much of the world, it's about her, isn't it?
A lot of it's about her, but I think it does go deeper than that. There's a sense of all that she represents, and a future King Charles, a future King William will represent that too. And monarchies, as you say, yeah. I mean, of course, there are dips and troughs, and it goes up and down. But I mean, it's been around for 1,000 years.
Oh yeah, I know. But she seems to have developed a certain aura. I can tell you, Donald Trump, who is not fazed by much or many things. I spoke to him on the phone about 40 minutes after he'd been to Buckingham Palace for the state visit. He was like an excited schoolboy. And I just could not believe, and to be honest, he's never stopped talking about me to the Queen ever since. He was massively impressed by her. And I remember being in a taxi last year. I was in the West Indies, and Philip had just died. I was talking to a Trinidadian driver, and he said, well, we may have got independence years ago, he said, but she's still my queen. And I can't think of anybody else in the world who would command that level of respect and affection. I mean, is she the most popular human being on the globe today?
I think you certainly say she's the most respected head of state in the world today. I don't think there's any doubt about that. She's the most famous woman in the world today. Her face, her image is probably the most reproduced image in history when you think of all the stamps and coins and everything else. And she does mean an awful lot to people, far beyond her own footprint, if you like. I mean, well beyond not just this country, well beyond the now 15 realms of which she's head of state, beyond the Commonwealth. I mean, you talk to people in America, in Germany, all over the world. They have this sort of, not quite sense of ownership, but they feel that she kind of speaks to them because she's just always been there. She's been this sort of solid presence through their life. And she represents different qualities to politicians.
In terms of soft power, for the United Kingdom and our footprint around the world, our relationships, I would argue potentially greatly enhanced by Brexit, but then I genuinely believe that, and I think that many of the royal family believe that too. I mean, it is something you can't even put a value on.
No. I mean, when I was writing this book, I interviewed a great man, Joseph Nye, Professor Joe Nye of Harvard University. He's the man who invented soft power, created the whole sort of concept of it. And it's the sort of the notion of influence, charm, persuasion versus coercion and force, and it's how you kind of get things done in the modern world. And he said that he disagreed with you on Brexit. He thought Brexit had been bad for Britain's soft power. But what he did say, he said that Britain's two top diplomatic soft power assets by a mile. One is the English language, and the other is the Queen and the monarchy, the royal family. Not just the Queen, but I mean, primarily the Queen. And it makes a huge difference. And I also, when I was doing this, I interviewed George W. Bush. A great thing about lockdown when you're writing a book, by the way, is a lot of VIPs can't, they're stuck at home and have to talk to people like me. And we had a long chat. He was very happy talking about the Queen because he'd met her when his father was president. So he'd known her probably longer than any world leader of that period. And what really struck him was he couldn't think of anyone else ever in history who had known and met 14 US presidents. I mean, just, you know, not even in America. It's just, to have met one or two is pretty amazing. To have met five, only a handful of people. But she's met 14. She started with Truman. All the way up
and
to the
president. Churchill here.
Yeah, and Churchill here. And that was one of the things that really struck Barack Obama on his state visit. And I spoke to the people behind his trip. And at the time, relations between Downing Street and the White House weren't great. But she absolutely bolstered this transatlantic alliance. And Obama just couldn't quite get over the fact that she could sit there and talk about all his predecessors, but also talk about the current sort of world with such sort of authority. And they really bonded. And I think a lot of the time she's been incredibly useful, frankly, for this country at a time when, you know, politicians may have their issues with other countries over all sorts of different things, but she speaks at a different level. Yeah. And that, diplomatically, that's so important. And Prince Charles does that as well. I mean, I've been on lots of trips with him around the world, and you know, he already has a sort of aura about him, and you know, he I think when the time comes, he in the same way she's been our longest reigning monarch, he's been our longest serving.
Before we come to Charles, tell me about that Isba.
Well, it was when I started writing it. It's called Queen of Our Times. A lot of people said, "Oh, come on, there's nothing new to say about it." You know, everyone said everything. And immediately I found there's lots of new stuff to say about her. And I was very lucky when she herself gave me access to her father's wartime diaries. And I wasn't sure what to expect. But they are very detailed, very candid.
So the Queen likes you, respects you?
Well, I mean, you know, you write a letter saying, you know, I would like to have a look at some of these papers. They haven't been published before. I don't know what the process is, but anyway, back came the message. Okay, you can see these diaries, and there are 11 volumes of them, and they live in the Round Tower, and the sort of where the Royal Archives are kept at Windsor. And to read them, I think it explains so much about her, because you're looking at this man who was never born to be king, same way his father was never born to be king, who suddenly finds himself catapulted into this position by the abdication, and very soon afterwards, you know, the country's at war, and he's got to hold it all together. And you get a sense of the stress that he's under. And of course, in the newsreels and in the cuttings and the sort of received narrative is that the King and Queen put on a brave face and, you know, they were there through the Blitz, and they were. But what you get from the diaries, you get a sense of just how bleak the situation's looking. And there's one point, he's really worried. The Germans are pushing through the Low Countries. They're trying to kidnap royal families all over Europe. And the King's worried that's happening here next. And he goes to see Churchill. He says, look, I think the time's come. We ought to get the princesses out of here. We ought to evacuate
off to Canada, the plan, wasn't it?
Yeah. And we're always told there was never any question of that. But actually, it was discussed. It was discussed several times. And Churchill said, look, I don't think now is the right time. And so they held their nerve, and of course they stayed here throughout the war. But when you read his account of being dive-bombed in his own home, seeing 2 bombs literally land in the quadrangle below him, and he writes, you know, I don't know how we got out of this alive. And then a few days later he says, I really shouldn't even be writing this down, but I can't concentrate. I keep staring out of the window. I can't read. You know, the poor man is in shock. Now, when you know that she...
So to have access to that's phenomenal.
Yeah, and well, it was great to be able to read this. And when you know that, you know, they're a very close family, so she is learning kingship, if you like, queenship, at his feet going through this. And it explains so much. And she does her first broadcast in 1940. Yeah. I mean, she's only 14. She's now the world's... I mean, I know you've been broadcasting a while, Nigel. She is unquestionably... I think she beats David Attenborough. She's been broadcasting since 1940 to the present day.
82
years.
Over
8 years. And you know, when you see how she was absorbing all this, I think when you see her confronted by the challenges she's faced through her reign, right up to the present time, whether it's family problems or COVID, you know, there's the old cliche, keep calm and carry on. But that's exactly what she does, and that's where she learns
it. Well, let's have a look. I've got to say, thank you for that.
Thank you.
And I am just not, today of all days, going to talk about any reservations I might have about Charles, any reservations I might have about Harry and Meghan, because I think, Robert, your account of being able to really read into the private lives of the royal family during those dark days is a really, really special thing. And I thank you very much indeed for joining us. This historic moment on Talking Pints.
It's going to be a great weekend.
It's going to be fantastic. Thank you.